Welcome to my channel. A quiet coffee girl in an Air Force briefing walks to the whiteboard and solves the billion-dollar mystery grounding America's most advanced fighter. What no one in the room knows. She's a Ghost Squadron test pilot, a problem solver pulled from the shadows to save aircraft no one admits exist. From the Phoenix to the Raven to the deadly fragile Peregrine, each fix drags her deeper into a world where skill means survival and invisibility is no longer an option. Because once the black projects remember your name, they never forget it. Some people think the Air Force smells like jet fuel and freedom. They're wrong. At least, not in the conference rooms. In there, it smells like burnt coffee, stale carpet, and egos. That morning, I was standing quietly against the wall in a briefing room at Ellington Field, Houston. I was in a plain enlisted airman's uniform, because technically, that's what they thought I was. My actual role was complicated. The fewer people who knew, the better. Major Brandt, square jaw, sharper ego, was holding court in the middle of the room, waving a laser pointer like a conductor's baton. The issue was the X-49 Phoenix, the so-called crown jewel of fifth-gen fighters. Except right now, she was nothing more than a billion-dollar hangar ornament. 2 unexplained mid-air failures in a month had grounded the whole fleet. When Brandt's voice cut through the room, I almost smiled. Not because he was funny, but because it was the kind of line you'd expect from a 90s military drama. Hey, somebody have the girl bring in another pot of coffee. We've got real pilots here trying to solve a real problem. The words hung in the air, smug and loud. A couple of guys chuckled, eager to stay in his orbit. I kept pouring coffee into the carafe I was holding. Didn't say a thing. My mother used to say silence could be a weapon sharper than any knife. I found that to be true, especially when dealing with men like Brandt. From the head of the table, General Mason was watching me, though not in the way Brandt did. His attention wasn't on my face or uniform, but on the way I stood. Balanced. Ready. The kind of posture you only see in people who've had to react to emergencies at Mach speed. Moving on, Brandt said, swaggering toward a big screen pulsing with incomprehensible lines of flight data. It's a classic aerodynamic stall, he declared. Fly-by-wires working against the pilot instead of with him. We need someone who flies by instinct, not a tech nerd with a manual. He glanced over at me, the coffee girl, with that thin smile that says you wouldn't understand. The lead engineer, a civilian named Doyle, spoke up, his voice tight. Major, with respect, simulators can't reproduce it. There's no fix in the manuals. The failure onset is immediate. Under high G turns, the left engine flames out asymmetrically and you get a flat spin. No recovery possible. We've tried everything. A heavy silence fell over the room. I've been in combat, but that silence? That was a different kind of dangerous. You could almost hear careers being measured for coffins. The general scanned the table. That's it. Not one more idea in this entire room. No one moved. So I did. I set the coffee down, walked to the front, and picked up a marker. Brandt's laugh, half disbelief, half contempt, followed me. Airman, he called, you're in the wrong place. Back to your station. I didn't even look at him. Just uncapped the marker and started drawing. The room went quiet again, but this time it was a different quiet. First came the equations, differential models, airflow dynamics, the math that underpinned what Brandt had dismissed as just a stall. My hand didn't hesitate. Years of doing this in black site hangars burned the movements into muscle memory. Then I sketched the Phoenix itself in 3/4 profile and traced the invisible trouble, a microscopic flutter in the left forward canard, creating a turbulent vortex that starved the intake during sustained high G turns. It was elegant in its cruelty. And fixable. A thin metal strake here, I explained without looking back, creating a vortex generator that stabilized the airflow before it reached the intake. Cheap. Simple. Final. I capped the marker and set it down. You could have heard a rivet drop. Brandt's mouth was slightly open. Doyle was staring at the board like he'd just been handed the answer to a riddle that had kept him awake for weeks. General Mason? He wasn't looking at the board at all. His eyes were locked on the patch barely visible on my left sleeve. The patch most people in the Air Force never saw. He knew exactly what it meant. You could tell the exact second General Mason recognized it. The slight squint, the pause mid-breath, and then the smallest of nods. almost imperceptible, but heavy enough to shift the whole atmosphere in the room. The patch was small, about the size of a half-dollar coin. Deep navy background, a silver streak cutting through stylized atmosphere, a single star riding the trail. It didn't look like much, unless you knew. It was the insignia of the 729th Special Projects Flight, Ghost Squadron, to the few cleared to speak its name out loud. We built, tested, and sometimes flew aircraft the Air Force didn't officially have. And we solved problems no one else could even see. General Mason straightened. "Sergeant, bring up her file." The young aide near the projector looked startled. He glanced at Brant, as if asking for confirmation. Brant gave a little shrug that meant this'll be good. A moment later, my equations vanished from the screen, replaced by a sterile personnel file. Name: Calloway, Jordan Elise. Rank: Captain. Status: Active Duty, Special Projects. Flight hours: 4,820. Certified airframes: X-37, YF-24, Phoenix prototypes, classified projects omitted. Specialty: Unpowered flight dynamics/asymmetrical propulsion systems. The room didn't breathe. I could almost hear Brant's worldview creaking under the weight of reality. He looked from the screen to me and back again, as if trying to reconcile the coffee girl with the resume of someone who'd been flying black projects while he was still logging hours in trainer jets. "Captain Calloway," Mason said, his voice now lined with respect. "On behalf of this command, I apologize for the oversight. The floor is yours." I gave a simple nod. It wasn't about theatrics. It never had been. I walked them through the fix again, slower this time. Brant didn't interrupt. No one did. I laid out the physics, the airflow disruption, the reason the simulators never caught it. I showed them exactly how the strike would redirect the vortex and prevent the starvation cascade. It wasn't magic. It was just correct. When I finished, Doyle leaned forward, still staring at the diagram. "How long to implement?" 2 days for fabrication. 1 day for installation," I replied. "You could have a bird back in the air by Friday." That cracked the tension. Not into laughter, into a ripple of low, stunned conversation. Mason stood. "Get it done." The meeting ended right there. But as I packed up my things, really just the marker in my own thoughts, Brant came over. For the first time all morning, he didn't have that smirk. I guess I owe you an apology." He hesitated, as if swallowing something sharp. "That's impressive work, Captain." I nodded once. "It's just the right work." By the next morning, it wasn't just a fix, it was a story. Word had leaked from the briefing room to the hangar bays, the officers' club, the maintenance shops. People were calling it the equation. It wasn't about me. It was about the fact that the most sophisticated fighter in the world had been rescued by a quiet officer no one recognized. They liked the poetry of that. Somewhere in the background, I could feel the weight of attention shifting toward me. And I don't mean just on base. You can't keep a good story contained on an Air Force base. Not when it's the kind of story that makes people feel like the place still runs on skill, not politics. By lunch that day, crew chiefs were talking about the coffee captain in the break rooms. By dinner, the maintenance guys were passing around a cell phone picture of my whiteboard sketches. By morning, someone had laminated the photo and pinned it up in the main hangar with a handwritten caption. "Assumptions are the enemy." The fix itself? We didn't even have to wait for it to be tested. The math was sound, the airflow model flawless. But we ran it through the paces anyway. That afternoon, I was in Hangar 4 with Doyle, standing beneath the skeletal frame of a Phoenix stripped down for modification. The sheet metal crew was fabricating the vortex strake, bending it just so, using my exact dimensions. "This is the easy part," Doyle said, running a hand over the bare titanium wing root. "The hard part is convincing them the fix came from a woman who walked into a briefing with a coffee pot." I smirked. "Then don't try. Just tell them it came from the right person." The first test flight was scheduled for Friday morning. We picked Lieutenant Coulson as the pilot. Good hands, no ego. He'd flown the Phoenix since its first prototype run and knew her quirks better than anyone. I stood on the tarmac as they rolled her out. The paint on the nose was still gleaming from yesterday's wash. The new strake looked so small, almost silly, until you remembered what it was doing. Coulson climbed in, ran through the startup sequence, and taxied out. Doyle stood beside me, arms crossed. "You nervous?" "No," I said honestly. "I know she'll fly." But what I didn't say was that I wasn't thinking about the jet. I was thinking about the room full of people about to watch their $20 billion headache vanish in a single controlled pull through high G turns. Control tower cleared him, and the Phoenix leapt off the runway with the grace only an overpowered fighter can manage. For the first 20 minutes, it was routine, altitude climbs, straight-line acceleration, the kind of maneuvers you'd expect from a systems check. Then came the real test. Coulson banked hard into a sustained 8G turn. My eyes went straight to the telemetry. Engine flow? Stable. Air pressure in the intake? Perfect. No flutter. No starvation. Doyle exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath all week. Well, I'll be. Coulson wasn't done. He pushed her harder. 9GS, then 9. 5. Still perfect. The left engine purred like it was born for it. The radio crackled. Control, this is Phoenix 2-1. All parameters nominal. No anomalies detected. I glanced at Doyle. Tell them to try a flat spin recovery drill. His eyebrows shot up. That's aggressive. Exactly. Coulson did it. She came out clean. You could feel the tension evaporate over the comms channel. Guys in the tower were cheering. Mechanics in the hangar were high-fiving like the Super Bowl had just ended in our favor. That afternoon, the brass signed off on fleet-wide implementation. The Phoenix was cleared to fly again. By the end of the week, I'd gone from anonymous to whispered about in every corner of the base. By the end of the month, I was the captain who saved the Phoenix program. It was a nice story. But nice stories have a way of drawing attention you don't always want. And I had worked very hard to stay invisible. By Monday morning, the Phoenix fleet was back in the air. Pilots were grinning like kids who'd just been told school was canceled for a month. The flight line buzzed in a way I hadn't heard since my days in black projects. You'd think that would have been the end of it. We solved the problem. Aircraft fixed. Mission accomplished. Time to slip back into the quiet corner I preferred. Except stories have a way of walking out the door, even when you bolt them shut. The first leak came from a crew chief at a poker game in the NCO club. Yeah, some captain. Looked like she was there to clean the coffee pot. Walked into the brass meeting and drew the fix on the board. Saved the whole fleet. That got told again to a pilot who'd just rotated in from Nellis. He told it to a friend in Ops. Ops told maintenance. Maintenance told Supply. Supply told anyone who'd listen. By Tuesday, it had traveled beyond Ellington. A buddy from Edwards AFB called me that night. You're the coffee captain, aren't you? I didn't answer. He laughed anyway. Knew it. It wasn't just the base rumor mill anymore. On Thursday, I walked into the ready room and saw a laminated printout taped above the coffee maker. It was my whiteboard sketch, photo and all, with the caption. She brought coffee. She brought the fix. She brought the Phoenix back. The part that unsettled me wasn't the flattery. It was that my name wasn't on it. And yet everyone knew. That night, I was in the simulator bay, running a younger pilot named Harper through emergency drills. I was leaning over his shoulder, pointing at a bank angle indicator, when I felt eyes on me. Brant was standing in the doorway. No swagger this time. Just watching. When Harper hit pause on the sim, Brant stepped forward. Captain, he said quietly. I was out of line in that meeting. I thought I understood the Phoenix. Clearly, I didn't. I've been studying your diagrams all week, and I still can't wrap my head around how that vortex interacts with the intake. If you've got time, would you walk me through it? I studied his face for a moment. The request wasn't for show. He meant it. I gave a small nod. That nod was forgiveness, instruction, and challenge, all in one. By the end of the month, the Phoenix wasn't just flying, it was dominating. Pilots swore the handling had improved so much it felt like a different airframe. One even joked it was like the jet got a brain transplant. But the part that made me uneasy was the way my quiet corner kept shrinking. Everywhere I went, someone wanted a story, a quote, a handshake. I wasn't here for any of that. I was here to work. And the higher your name floats, the harder it is to stay out of the wind. A week after the first Phoenix was cleared for combat training runs, I walked into my tiny office in Hangar 4 to find a stack of manila folders on my desk. Doyle leaned in the doorway, sipping coffee. They came from upstairs, he said. Pentagon. Somebody wants every shred of your math, your airflow models, even your handwritten notes. I raised an eyebrow. They don't already have that from the board photo everyone's passing around? He smirked. Apparently not in an official package stamped for eyes only. When the Pentagon wants something, they don't send a polite email. They send people. The next day, 2 officers in dark suits, clearly not Air Force, showed up on base. They didn't introduce themselves by name, just flash credentials so fast you could barely register the acronyms. "We're here to speak with Captain Calloway," the taller one said. I noticed he didn't phrase it as a request. They walked me into a windowless conference room and closed the door. No small talk, no coffee, just a sleek laptop set up between them. The short one opened it, revealing a flight video, grainy, infrared. A Phoenix banking hard into a high G turn, engine parameters rock solid. "My fix in action. This straight design," he began. "It's deceptively simple." His voice had the tone of someone who didn't like being impressed. "We need to know if it could be adapted for other platforms, say, the Shadowhawk or the Artemis prototypes." I gave him the kind of flat look that says I know you already have your own engineers working on it. If your airframe has the same intake starvation pattern, yes. Otherwise, no. You can't just bolt it on and hope. The tall one leaned forward. "We're not asking you to hope, Captain. We're asking you to oversee the retrofits." There it was. The hook. I kept my voice neutral. "I have a duty station here. My work is with the Phoenix program." He smiled faintly. "That's flexible." I'd been in the game long enough to know what that meant. The kind of flexibility that comes with sealed orders and NDAs thicker than an engine manual. They were trying to pull me back into the shadows I'd worked so hard to leave. That night, I walked the flight line long after most of the crews had gone home. The Phoenix sat under floodlights, her skin gleaming in the cool Texas night. My strake design barely visible under the wing root. I'd given her back her sky, and now, the sky wanted me back. The thing about black projects is that once they remember your name, they never forget it. 2 days after that meeting with the suits, my orders came down. They weren't wrapped in ceremony. Just a single-page transfer directive slid into my inbox between maintenance reports and a requisition request for hydraulic seals. Effective immediately. Temporary duty assignment. Special projects liaison. Location, classified. Duration, indefinite. Doyle saw me reading it in the hangar break room. "Temporary?" he asked, leaning on the doorway. I gave him a thin smile. "You know as well as I do. Temporary means they're keeping me until they've squeezed every last drop out of me." The following morning, a C-21, a Learjet, touched down at Ellington. 2 loadmasters rolled up with a small cargo crate, mine. Inside, my personal flight gear, my notes, and a stack of simulation drives they'd pulled from the Phoenix program archive. I hadn't packed them. Someone else had. That was their way of saying this isn't a negotiation. Before I left, Mason called me into his office. The general was a man who never wasted words, but that morning, he didn't rush. "You've made a lot of people notice you, Calloway," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Most of them you want on your side. Some you don't. You'll learn which is which soon enough." I didn't answer. He studied me for a long moment. "They'll tell you this is about your strake design. That's only half true. The other half is, they finally remember who you are. Ghost Squadron pilots don't stay anonymous forever." The jet took me west, climbing over a quilt of clouds until the Gulf was just a shimmer on the horizon. I've always loved that altitude, where the world below feels like it can't touch you. But this time, I felt the weight of invisible strings pulling me higher and tighter. We landed at an airfield with no markings, just a runway carved into the desert. The kind of place that doesn't exist on civilian charts. A colonel I didn't recognize met me at the stairs. "Captain Calloway," he said, not bothering with a handshake. "We've got a hangar waiting for you. Your design saved one program. Let's see if you can do it again, under less friendly conditions." Inside the hangar, a tarp-covered airframe sat in the middle of the floor. Judging by the wing sweep and intake geometry, I knew instantly it wasn't a Phoenix. It was something new, something they hadn't even admitted existed. And from the look in the colonel's eyes, I was about to become the person who had to keep it in the air. They waited until the doors were sealed before pulling the tarp. The air inside the hangar smelled faintly of fresh composites and scorched wiring, the scent of something that had flown hard and come back limping. The aircraft underneath was leaner than the Phoenix, more angular. The wings had a wicked sweep, like a bird of prey mid-dive. The intakes were recessed and narrow, almost hidden. Someone had designed her to be invisible, even before stealth coatings. The colonel watched my face. "We're calling her the Raven. Prototype only. 6 flights so far. 3 of them ended in mid-air aborts." He didn't need to add the last part. I'd already noticed the panels along the left intake had been removed, tools still lying nearby. They brought me the flight telemetry, blocky green numbers scrolling down the screen like an impatient heartbeat. The failure pattern was there if you knew how to read the rhythm. At sustained turns above 7.8 gs, airflow into the port engine collapsed. Not starved like the Phoenix had been, choked. Similar problem, I said, tapping the data. Different cause. The Phoenix ate itself because of a vortex generated forward of the intake. The Raven's losing pressure from inside the duct. The Colonel's jaw tightened. Fix it. I spent the next 48 hours buried in schematics and computational fluid dynamics models. The engineers here were good, very good, but they were still chasing the wrong variable. They'd focused on the intake mouth, convinced it was a geometry problem. It wasn't. It was resonance. At high G sustained turns, the duct interior was hitting a harmonic frequency. It was the same phenomenon that could shatter a wine glass. Only now, it was shattering airflow stability. The solution wasn't glamorous. It never is. 2 internal baffle plates, set at precise angles just inside the duct, would break up the standing wave before it could build. A fix you could fabricate in hours. A fix no one wanted to believe at first, because it was too simple. The Colonel finally gave the nod. Do it, but you're in the cockpit for the test. I hadn't flown a bird this green since my Ghost Squadron days. The seat harness still had that stiff, new nylon feel. Half the cockpit labels were temporary tape and grease pencil. Systems booted like they were waking from a bad dream. I rolled her out to the runway as dawn burned over the desert. The Raven's engine whine was deeper than the Phoenix. Not a scream, but a growl. And she wanted to run. We took her high and dirty right away. Banked hard into an 8G turn. No choke. 9GS. Still clean. I could feel the smile building before I even leveled out. Not because the fix had worked, I knew it would. Because the Raven wanted to fly, and now, she finally could. Back on the ground, the Colonel met me at the ladder. You've just bought yourself another indefinite assignment, Captain. The way he said it, I couldn't tell if it was a reward or a warning. I knew one thing. This wasn't the last time they dragged me into a hangar of ghosts. The Raven's second test flight wasn't even cold in the logs before the calls started coming in. Not from the Colonel this time. From people who didn't use rank as an introduction. I knew the type. They lived in the blank spots between organizational charts. You didn't find their offices unless they wanted you to. 3 days after that first clean flight, I was walking across the tarmac when a black SUV rolled past the flight line checkpoint without slowing. It stopped 10 feet from me, engine idling. The back window slid down. Captain Calloway, a voice said. Low. Familiar. Dangerously familiar. I leaned down. Inside sat Commander Rafe Kellen, Ghost Squadron veteran, and the man who'd pulled me out of a burning YF-24 over Nevada a lifetime ago. The last time I'd seen him, he was limping away from a medevac, smoke still clinging to his flight suit. We'd both promised not to get dragged back into the deep black again. Apparently, one of us had broken that promise. You've been busy, he said, half a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Phoenix. Raven. That's 2 miracles in as many months. You starting a streak? I crossed my arms. You're the one showing up in unmarked cars. What do you want, Kellen? He glanced toward the hangars. What I need is someone I trust to look at a third airframe. But this one's not in the desert. And it's not on the books. I stepped back from the SUV. No, I'm already neck deep here. And I've seen how this goes. Every time I fix one of your ghost projects, you hand me another. I didn't sign up for a chain of favors. Kellen didn't argue. He just held my gaze a moment longer, then said, This one's different, Geordie. People are going to die if we don't solve it. And you and I both know you're the only one who can. Then the window rolled up, and the SUV pulled away. That night, I sat in my quarters staring at the faint glow of the desert airfield outside my window. I'd buried that part of my life for a reason. But the truth was, he was right. If the Raven and the Phoenix had taught me anything lately, it was that the work had a way of finding me whether I wanted it or not. 2 days later, I was strapped into a C-17 headed toward a city I'd sworn I'd never see again. And in my gut, I knew Kellen wasn't telling me the whole story. We landed under a sky the color of ash. One of those mornings where the air tastes metallic before the first cup of coffee. The runway was cracked and faded, a forgotten strip of concrete just outside an unnamed coastal city. Kellen was waiting at the bottom of the ramp, hands in the pockets of a flight jacket that had seen too many hours in the elements. He didn't waste breath on small talk. "This way," he said, and started walking toward a squat hangar that looked like it had been built in the Cold War and never updated. Inside, the air was damp, smelling faintly of salt water and fuel. The hangar doors were only halfway open, letting in a dull gray light. The third airframe sat in the center like a bad secret. At first glance, it looked civilian: small fuselage, narrow wings, twin props shrouded in cowlings. But the moment I saw the ventral intakes and the narrow canopy lines, I knew. This wasn't a commuter plane. It was an intelligence platform, one they didn't want on the books. "She's called the Peregrine," Kellen said quietly. "Prototype surveillance bird. Operates low and slow, can disappear into civilian traffic patterns. Or at least she's supposed to." I walked a slow circle around her. The airframe was beautiful in its own ugly way. Utilitarian, almost plain, but hiding a kind of coiled potential. "What's the problem?" I asked. He hesitated. "She's killing her own crew." It took him a while to explain. The Peregrine was designed to hug the terrain for hours, sometimes days, at a time, riding low enough to dodge radar. But at sustained altitudes under 500 feet, the airflow into her environmental system was creating a low-frequency vibration. Not enough to rattle the frame apart, but enough to slowly destroy the people inside. Headaches, disorientation, blurred vision. One crewman blacked out entirely on a test run over the Gulf. "They've tried damping pads, cabin redesigns, even running at slightly higher altitudes," Kellen said. "Nothing works. If we can't fix it, she gets buried. And every intel op she was meant to run gets handed to someone who doesn't have the same limitations." "Limitations?" I asked. He gave me a look. The kind that don't show up on official maps. It was clear this wasn't about saving one airplane. This was about keeping a capability alive without tipping off the wrong people that it existed at all. I ran my fingers along the Peregrine's intake lip, feeling the faint irregularity in the composite edge. "This isn't an environmental system issue," I said. "It's airflow resonance through the forward ducting. Same family of problem as the Raven. And I've seen it before." Kellen's expression changed, the first flicker of relief I'd seen from him since I stepped off the plane. But in my gut, I knew this one was going to be worse. The Phoenix and the Raven had been fighters, built to take punishment. The Peregrine? She was fragile by design. And that meant every fix would have to be a scalpel cut, not a hammer blow. The Peregrine wasn't going to give me the luxury of brute force solutions. She was built to look harmless, to slip under radars and through air corridors no fighter could dream of entering. Any external change would throw off her signature and defeat her reason for existing. This was surgery, and surgery meant precision. For 3 days I camped inside that hangar, living on bad coffee and the sound of wind tunnel data screaming through my headset. The airflow resonance showed itself in every model, a standing wave forming just aft of the forward intake lip, turning the duct into a low-frequency speaker aimed straight at the cockpit. Every crew who flew her had been sitting in the crosshairs of a weapon they couldn't see. The answer came to me late on the third night, the kind of solution you almost dismiss because it's too quiet, too small. A single composite ridge, no taller than my thumbnail, bonded along the duct's interior curve. It wouldn't redirect airflow. It would break the harmonic before it could ever form. Kellen watched me sketch it out on the back of a maintenance manifest. "That little thing?" he asked. "That little thing," I said. "It'll never make it into a glossy report, but it'll save your cruise." We had the ridge fabricated in less than a day, installed in half an hour. Then came the real test. The Peregrine lifted into the salt gray morning with me in the right seat, headset snug against my ears. We leveled off at 480 feet, the regime where she'd always gone from graceful to lethal. I braced for the familiar pressure at the base of my skull. It never came. The cabin was steady. No tremor in my vision, no hum in my teeth. Just the sound of the props and the low rush of air over the fuselage. When we landed, Kellen didn't say anything at first. Just walked a slow circle around the Peregrine, hands in his jacket pockets. Finally, he stopped beside me. "You've got a bad habit," he said. "You keep pulling birds out of the grave. One day, they're going to ask you to do it for something that doesn't deserve saving." I met his eyes. "And then I'll say no." He gave me the kind of half smile you give when you don't believe the other person, but you want to. A week later, I was back at Ellington. The Phoenix fleet was still flying flawlessly. The Raven was headed into expanded trials. And somewhere far from any map, the Peregrine was skimming treetops without killing her own crew. The laminated whiteboard photo still hung in the ready room. Someone had scrawled a new line under the old caption. Assumptions are still the enemy. I never went looking for any of it. Not the Phoenix, not the Raven, not the Peregrine. They found me because problems have a way of sniffing out the people who can't leave them unsolved. That's the curse of knowing how to fix things. You don't get to stay invisible forever. But maybe, just maybe, you get to leave the sky a little cleaner than you found it.